You're listening to Let's Talk Creation with Todd Wood and Paul Garner, the creation show where we learn, grow, and worship.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Creation with Todd and Paul. I'm Todd Wood.
And I'm Paul Garner.
And we are together again.
We are.
Live and in person.
Well, that exactly.
Welcome back to the U.S.
It's great to be here.
Yep, great to have you. Before we get into this, I want to remind you to like this video or unlike it. I don't care. Just interact with the video in some way. That'd be great. Subscribe, click that bell to get notifications, whatever it is you need to remind you, hey, there's a new episode of Let's Talk Creation, your favorite podcast. Do that. That'd be great.
It would.
Yeah, and if you're on a
fabulous
platform that's other than YouTube, what can they do?
Well, they can subscribe, of course, on their podcast platform. They can leave us a review. Leave us a positive review.
Thank you.
All of that is very welcome.
All very welcome, very important. And it's important to know that people care about our weird ramblings about weird subjects. You never know what you're going to get with Let's Talk Creation. We'll talk about obscure biblical passages, obscure non-biblical passages. We'll talk about fossils and stuff. You just never know. It's kind of an exciting time.
Yeah.
What are they going to do this week?
It's a magical mystery, Tom.
It is, yeah. So last week, on the previous episode of Let's Talk Creation, we were going over Lucy skeleton, and we talked about a lot of detailed stuff. We talked about, why this isn't a faithful representation of the skeleton. We talked about how it was discovered and excavated. We talked about some of the features, how they differ from modern apes, how they differ from modern humans.
Yeah.
Lots of different things. But we kind of left everybody hanging with the mission critical question, which is, does this prove evolution?
Yeah.
So Paul, why don't you kick us off here with what's the big question? What's the big deal? Where should we begin with this thing?
Yeah. Well, I've, as you say, we've looked at lots of details of the skeleton, and last time in particular, we talked about the knee, and the story about the knee. We talked about the pelvis.
We did.
And the reconstruction of the pelvis. And Todd, in the last episode, you mentioned that we know that this was reconstructed reasonably correctly, even though it had to be kind of taken apart and put back together again.
Yes. Because
we have other examples of Australopithecine pelvises.
We do.
Pelvises? Pelves?
Pelves.
Pelves. So
pelvic bones. There you go.
Yeah. So this episode, you've actually got one.
I've got one. Yes. This is not as good as as a cast because it's just a print of a 3D scan. But yeah, you can sort of see. You look along the top here and compare the Lucy bone to this one. You can see there's a nice curvature.
Yep.
Along the top edge here, and that Lucy's clearly not right.
No.
This particular skeleton is these pelvic bones here are from a discovery from a place called Sterkfontein. And this is STS-14. And it's one of the most complete Australopithecus pelvis we have. You can see we've got both halves, and we also have a sacrum from this specimen. And it's a bit distorted. But you still get the sense there's a bit of flatness. But it's not flat like a chimpanzee pelvis.
Right.
And it's got this nice curved margin to it, like ours is. And so, we can sort of compare this then to the Lucy reconstruction and say, well, it's not that bad. This one's not damaged in the way the Lucy's pelvis was. So we can sort of say it's not bad. This is much more similar to Lucy than our pelvis or a chimpanzee pelvis.
So that's kind of reassuring when we are thinking about the story of the reconstruction of Lucy's pelvis.
Yeah.
But creationists have made a big deal about that.
Yeah, they have, yeah.
And why? I mean, what's the big deal? Why have they made such a big deal about the pelvis?
Well, at stake here is upright walking.
Okay.
Upright walking like people do. So in the modern world, when you look at the apes, which are clearly animals,
Yeah.
and the humans, which are clearly human, one of the big obvious things is the apes walk around on all fours,
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, and we walk around very smoothly on two legs. Now, it's true, there are some apes who can sort of totter around short distances on their hind legs.
Yeah.
That's true. But a smoothly walking bipedal creature, that's only us. So from the beginning then, Johanson emphasized Lucy's uniqueness in this way. And walking around on two legs was a big part of that. From the time he found the knee in 73 to the time he found the entire skeleton, this was a big deal. And he could tell from the knee that it was really not, the knee has a particular angle to it, the way the thigh bone meets up with the shin bone. There's a particular angle there. And the knee he found in 73 had the right angle to be an upright walking creature. So that suggested that this thing was walking upright. And he made a big fuss about it.
Yeah. So the big fuss then is basically the idea that this is our human ancestor because this is the first ape that stands upright and begins to walk upright on those African plains. That's the idea, right?
Yeah, but you have to remember, and this is going to sound weirdly cynical and sort of typically creationist, which I think creationists have a valid point here. Maybe they haven't got the knee right. The knee that was found a mile away and 200 feet deep, that's not part of the skeleton, never was. Pelvis reconstruction, not that bad. But in terms of the marketing value here, Johanson was working at a time in Ethiopia where there hadn't been a lot of discoveries made in that part of Africa. The Leakeys had been working farther south in northern Tanzania at Olduvai Gorge. And they had been making lots of discoveries for a long time. And so there was a bit of rivalry there. There was a bit of competition, right? And everybody wanted to be the one that made the discovery of the human ancestor. We found it. It proves evolution. But yeah, that's you got to understand there's going to be marketing there. And technically, even within the evolutionary paradigm, even if you believe that the human evolution is true, there is no way to know that this is any kind of grandmother to human beings.
Yeah.
It's just not possible to say that this skeleton, you could believe in human evolution, that human evolution was true, and still say, this doesn't make for a very good ancestor. This doesn't look like the kind of thing I would expect a human ancestor to look like.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of talk about proving human evolution, but there's a large component of hyperbole and marketing and showmanship that goes into that kind of discussion.
Yeah. Well, I kind of get that, but surely, if there really was an ape-like creature that was walking around on two legs, it kind of fits, with the idea that humans evolved from ape-like ancestors that came down from the trees, began walking upright on, with the spread of the grasslands in Africa. So, sure, you can't say for certain, you can't identify direct ancestors in the fossil record. So you can't say Lucy is definitely our great-great-great-great-grandmother. But it still seems like it's important in this story, right? So I want to kind of dig in and say, well, how good is the evidence that Lucy really did walk upright? That's kind of the crucial question I want to get to the bottom of.
Yeah, so before I get into that,
okay,
I just want to comment a little bit on familiarity. I think to some extent, this walking upright business is kind of overemphasized because we don't have today examples of anything in the ape group that walks around on two legs.
Sure.
Okay? We're the only ones that do it.
Yeah.
So if you saw some ape walk in on two legs very smoothly, with two long legs very smoothly, that would be shocking to you. I think it would be kind of a shocking thing. And yet, walking around on two legs is not what makes us human.
Right.
We've made robots that can do that.
Right.
We have kangaroos that do that, right?
Yeah.
And I know that's a silly example, and I know kangaroos aren't apes and they're nowhere near us on the evolutionary tree or whatever, but still, walking around on two legs by itself is not what makes us human.
Yeah.
There's more to the story than that. And so, even as I acknowledge there's an emotional component to this, I have to admit that may be a lot of why people get worked up about this. It's just a familiarity issue and this emotional shock of thinking, this is an ape that walks on two legs. Yeah. So, what's the deal? Can we actually tell from this skeleton how this creature...
Yeah, that's what I want to know.
That's what we want to know. All right, so if you look at the skeleton of a chimpanzee and the skeleton of a modern human, so a four-legged chimpanzee walker and a two-legged human walker, you're going to notice there's a lot of differences from the head to the toe that differentiate us by the way we walk. There's the way our skull sits on top of our backbone. There are differences in the actual pieces of the backbone itself. Ours has a curvature that's not present in the chimpanzee because we're upright walkers. The pelvis is going to be different. Basically, anything below the waist is going to be really different. The pelvis will be different. The pelvis of a chimpanzee is flat, and the pelvis of a modern human is going to be much more bowl-shaped and rounded. The sacrum here, that is going to be shorter and fatter, basically, in humans than it is in chimpanzees. Chimpanzee sacrum is much longer and narrower. We have angles that are different all along the shaft of the thigh bone. The shaft of the shin bone is very different. It's different at the ankle joint. It's different at the knee joint. It's different. The chimpanzee tibia, the shin bone is curved, pretty sharply curved in a chimpanzee. And then the ankle and foot is also a place where we can see quite a bit of difference between an upright walker and a quadruped. So with the Lucy skeleton, we have a lot of the stuff below the waist that we can see, and we've got pieces of the backbone. And we don't really have enough of the skull here to be able to say much about that, but we've got a lot of elements present. Okay, so obviously we've already mentioned the knee because of AL129, the knee they found the year before that came from a different individual, but probably from the same species. It looks like the knee of an upright walking creature. It has an angle to it.
Right.
Now the angle there, the angle is important because what it does is keeps our feet directly under the center of mass for our bodies. Which is really important when you want to walk smoothly. If you want to look real smooth when you walk, you need to have your feet close to the center of mass. Otherwise, you totter back and forth.
Right.
Which is what apes do. They don't have their knees don't bring their legs and feet close together to the center. They keep them separated, and so they totter back and forth, which is exactly what you see in toddlers, for example. When they're learning to walk, they totter back and forth as they learn to walk. Because they don't have the knee joint is actually a developmental feature that grows as you learn how to walk. Now, there are apes that have that knee joint angle, like ours. Orangutans. Now, orangutans spend a lot of time in trees, so they need to keep their feet close to the center of their body because they're walking on limbs. It's like a tightrope walker.
So,
that kind of makes sense. But they're still not very good at walking on two legs upright. They still look goofy. So I don't want to get too excited about the orangutans here. But otherwise, you've got all these pieces down below. You've got the angle of the knee. You've got the roundness of the pelvis. The sacrum here is short and squat. It is not like the sacrum of a chimpanzee. It's not long and narrow like a chimpanzee. The tibia, we don't have very many pieces of the tibia there, but what we've got is extraordinary. The shin bone is the tibia.
Yeah.
So the top of the tibia, let's look at the top,
This one.
that piece right there. So if we look at the top of the tibia here, that knee joint surface is right in line with the shaft, which is exactly what you would need to walk around upright. For the chimpanzee, the joint is displaced backwards quite dramatically. The shaft of the tibia is quite dramatically curved in chimpanzee, and there's no evidence of curvature. Even though it's broken, we still don't have evidence that it's curved at all. If we look at the bottom of the tibia, this is another really easy thing to note here. You see that surface there is nicely curved like that.
Yeah.
And it's relatively flat this direction.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because the knee joint, that ankle joint needs to work this way. It needs to be able to swivel along the top of the foot.
Mm.
And in chimpanzees, it's not like that. It swivels this way. The feet are displaced.
Okay.
So
it's
it's not like
out.
that. We look at the ankle bone there, the talus. See the same story. The talus of a chimpanzee is displaced. That top surface there where it meets up with the tibia is displaced, and here it's largely in line with the talus, which is consistent with a talus that is allowing you to walk like this.
Mm.
And then, so just from this skeleton, we can see below the waist, there's a lot of features that sure look like they do in human beings with respect to upright walking. Doesn't make them human, just means they're good at upright walking. We also have pieces of the backbone. And as I mentioned, we have curvature in our spines, right? So we have the lumbar goes in, the thoracic, the rib part of your chest, it sort of bulges out, and then it curves back around again as you come to your neck. That's facilitated in part by what we call wedging of the vertebral bodies. So this is the body of the backbone. Mm-hmm. And if you look at it on the profile here, in human beings, the thickness in the front here would be different from the thickness in the back.
Okay.
So they would actually, that's why we call it wedging, right? Because it looks like a kind of a wedge.
A wedge.
Clever, isn't it? Yeah. So we don't have much wedging in the vertebra of Lucy. So that's the one piece where you sort of come away and go, that's not very good. But when you stop to look at all of the evidence that's present in this skeleton, you've got the top of the knee, the bottom of the knee angle, the shaft of the tibia that's straight, the ankle joint, both sides of the ankle joint. You've got the sort of rounded pelvis and the squat sacrum. You've got a lot of pieces of evidence there that suggest that the owner of this skeleton was an upright walking creature. And that, there's the backbone. That's weird and that's different. But the rest of it sure seems to look like came from. So what do you say? I mean, let me before I ask you that, before I put you on the spot, I will say one feature is not enough.
Yeah. Okay.
Because as I mentioned, the orangutans, right? They have that knee angle like we do. So one feature alone is not enough. But if you've got, half a dozen witnesses to the same crime, and they're all telling you exactly the same story, what are you going to conclude? So here we've got multiple witnesses to how this thing walked around. What would you conclude?
Yeah. Okay. So you want me to basically say it, right?
I don't want to say it. I'm in enough trouble.
I mean, it feels like there's a lot riding on this question. Not only because creationists, have been quite insistent, many of them, that Lucy walked on all fours, that she didn't walk upright. But also, like you say, because there's kind of the emotional impact, I think, of just the idea of an ape that walked upright in a manner similar to us. I mean, that has a kind of a certain emotional sort of shock value, I think. And we've sort of been trained, haven't we? We've sort of been conditioned to think of an upright walking ape as evidence of evolution, that's kind of almost enough, to kind of to sort of seal the deal. And I'm sure, if I were to say now, that Lucy walked upright. Lucy is an ape that walked upright. There are going to be lots of our listeners, lots of our viewers who are going to be deeply uncomfortable with that for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah.
So, some of them may be good reasons, and they're going to be very uncomfortable about it. So, before I commit myself, I would quite like to see, is there more besides Lucy herself that helps to confirm what we're seeing here?
Oh, that's excellent. Because that is exactly what you'd want.
So I'm throwing the question back to you.
Okay. Okay. All right. Sure. Yeah. So, and you're right. Having multiple samples of a species is really kind of vital to be able to tell you, is Lucy's condition here weird? Right?
Yeah.
Is she just weird, or is she typical?
Yeah. Exactly.
And we have other specimens.
Okay.
So there's a site called 333 from the same region, Afar, the Afar Triangle of Ethiopia. And there we have the skeletal remains, and this is much more fragmentary, but there's at least 19 different individuals from that deposit. So there's a lot of material there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a skeleton called Kadanuumuu, which is a fairly big male partial skeleton.
Okay.
And then we have the Dikika Juvenile, which is also from the Afar region. And that is an extremely well-preserved partial skeleton of probably a 3-year-old. So there's a lot of material from the species. We do not have to take Lucy's word for it.
Okay.
And that's good.
Yeah.
Because you want to be able to verify, is this skeleton weird?
Yeah.
Okay, so looking at all the material, what do we find? It's remarkably consistent with what we find in Lucy. So Kadanuumuu has a preserved knee. It's angled like the 129 knee that was found in 73. It's angled like Lucy's knee was presumably angled when it's sort of reconstructed and mirrored so that you can make an actual knee. Mm-hmm. We have a preserved knee from the Dikika Juvenile that's also consistent with the same thing. The Dikika Juvenile also has a partial left foot that's very well preserved and includes the bottom of the leg bones.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's preserved in articulation, which means that the bones are all sort of connected to all the other bones, like they would be when the Dikika Juvenile was alive. And there we can see the ankle is exactly the way it is in Lucy. It swivels back and forth on the foot. And we can also see, because there's more of it preserved, the toes aren't preserved, but most of the rest of it's preserved. We can see arches on the foot that we would expect from upright walkers that we have ourselves.
Okay.
So we've got that. We additionally have from Site 333, we have most of the bones, if you put them all together, of a foot. And it is also the ankle swivels back and forth like ours does, and there's arching, and it's not exactly the same as ours, but it has the sorts of features you would expect an upright walker to have. In addition, you have the first metatarsal, which is the big toe bone.
Okay.
And on the big toe, this is kind of important. At the end of the big toe, because when you walk, you flex like this, right?
Yeah.
When you're lifting your foot up and you're pushing off to walk, you flex upward. So you need to have, basically that big toe has an articular surface that basically runs all the way around it.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what you find in the material from 333. So when you put it all together, there are a lot of reasons to think that Lucy and her kin, her species, walked around on two legs. So there, I've said it for you. You don't have to make the commitment. I did it. It's my fault. Blame me. Send your hate mail to me. But yeah, I don't see any good reason to think that the evidence can be interpreted in any other way. You're sort of getting into special pleading to say that this variety of evidence, this quality of evidence, doesn't mean what it's clearly meaning.
Yeah, so that's kind of shot my fox, because I was hoping you were going to tell me that Lucy is sort of unique and special in some way. And it's consistent. So that's all very
it's weirdly
troubling.
Small. It's weirdly small.
Weirdly small.
But other than that, no, the anatomy is pretty typical.
Which doesn't, weirdly small maybe. That doesn't sound a very big deal.
That doesn't help.
That doesn't help, no. So that brings us then to the big question. So the big question is then, are the discoverers of Lucy, Don Johanson and his evolutionary colleagues, are they right to say that Lucy and her kin that you've been talking about are human ancestors? Are they really apes that preceded us in evolutionary history, on the evolutionary tree? That's the big question.
Right. So that question kind of comes with a lot of baggage, and I kind of alluded to this in the previous episode. It's a loaded question, because does it prove evolution sort of assumes that that's a possibility.
Right.
And in my own research, I have not found evidence that puts the Lucy skeleton together with anything that's human. I've always found that Lucy's quite distinct from what I would say is human.
Okay.
And so I've never once, as I've looked at the Lucy skeleton, ever suspected that these things are connected with modern human beings. So it's not a human ancestor in that sense. And yes, we focused only on walking here. But when you look at the evidence as a whole, the differences that we talked about in the previous episode, there's just too many of them to make me think that this is really a human ancestor.
Okay, but so your studies have sort of shown that it clusters separately from humans, but does that kind of rule out the possibility that it's sort of pre-human, that it's on its way to becoming human?
So again, I think we're dealing, and I don't think this is just semantics, I think we're dealing with this annoying question of whether you think evolution is possible, or whether you think evolution is true, or whether you think it's false. How you approach this depends a lot on your presuppositions. So if you think that evolution is well supported, and you think that it's true, you might look at this skeleton and say, I can't say that this is, Grandma Lucy, but it sure looks like something that Don Johanson was right about it. This looks like something similar to the first ape that came down from the trees and started walking around on two legs. But if you're more skeptical of evolution, then I think Lucy's just kind of an example of another member of the ape diversity. And yeah, I don't think you're going to be very satisfied with that
So
answer.
yeah, so presupposition. So
Yeah.
I mean, it could sound a bit like you're putting the conclusion ahead of the evidence,
Yes.
right?
Perhaps it does.
So, if you think evolution is false, then this isn't very good evidence for evolution. But that kind of seems like sort of bias or prejudice in a particular direction. I mean, if I came to you and I said, look, here's some evidence for whatever, for X.
Yeah.
And you said, well, I don't think X is true, so that's not good evidence for it. And that's not going to satisfy me
No.
very much. So shouldn't we be trying to be more objective than that to try to come to this without that kind of bias?
It would be nice if we could, but I don't think we can.
Right.
I think that any time we approach a skeleton like this, we're bringing our own baggage with us, the way we think about these things. And I don't think that's bad. It's what it is to be human, right? But I think it's good for us to say, look, I'm biased and I have these biases, and sort of lay them out and let people see them. And they can evaluate whether those biases are influencing our judgment or how they might be influencing our judgment.
Yeah.
So I think that people look at Lucy and think that this is some sort of astonishing confirmation of evolution, in part because that's what they've been told to think.
Right. Sure.
Right? Johanson came along with his book and said, look, we've got the proof of human evolution. And of course, he's trying to distract your attention from the leakies down farther south.
It's the subtitle of his book, right? The Beginnings of Humankind. I mean, that's
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's
Exactly. And so when you think of it that way, you think, wow, this really does confirm evolution. But wait a minute. It's not like Johanson was out there just randomly digging for fossils. It's not like he, laid awake at night going, boy, I wonder if evolution is true. If only I could find some evidence. That's not what was happening.
right.
Johanson and Leakey, those guys went out there deliberately looking for evidence of human evolution. They were already convinced that it was true. This was not some random discovery, a lucky discovery. This was something they were specifically looking to find. And I don't think that necessarily, ruins the discovery, because it's still a real creature and it's still very interesting. But when you hear how they portray it, you've got to remember there's no objectivity here. They were convinced human evolution was true. They were convinced Africa was the place to look for it. They went out to look for the evidence. They found some skeletons, and of course they're going to say that these are the evidences of that evolution. But I come to this with a different set of conclusions, and a different set of assumptions.
Yeah.
I'm coming to this with assumptions about creation, assumptions about the Bible and its record of creation. I'm coming to this with beliefs about, theology and my own experience with God, as well as all of my understanding of the science. And I'm looking at this skeleton in more detail than many people have been able to do. I'm looking at it as evidence of ape diversity. And I don't really feel like I have any doubt about that or uncertainty about this. I don't think human evolution is a plausible idea to begin with. Okay. So this is clearly evidence of ape diversity, no doubt. And it doesn't really bother me to think about it as being upright walking or whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't think that we can just say, hey, let's think about this objectively. Think about this objectively usually means, please accept my set of biases,
Right.
and prejudices that I come to this with.
Yeah.
It doesn't really mean to think about it objectively.
Yeah. So rather than trying to pretend that, any of us are without bias. We really just need to be kind of looking at these competing hypotheses
Yes.
for interpreting the data and kind of comparing and contrasting the different
Yes.
ways of interpreting.
Exactly.
things.
How well does this match up with
Yeah.
what I know to be true
Yeah.
from everything else in my life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So my next question then, what is your scenario for understanding Lucy? How do you interpret this now in light of everything else, all the evidence put together?
Right.
Other things besides Lucy that we haven't talked about, but put it in context. How do you understand this thing?
Excellent question. So I would start with some biblical boundary markers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so part of that is going to be the creation week, the separate, unique creation of human beings, the separate creation of animals.
Okay.
And I'm going to understand there was a global flood at some point in human history, and this was all relatively recently. And so those kind of markers are going to guide how I read and understand and interpret the Lucy skeleton.
Okay.
So that's pretty typical of creationism, right? I'm not doing anything shockingly unusual there.
Uh-huh.
Now, I've already mentioned that my research here has never put the Lucy skeleton together with any human beings.
Yep.
I've never found any evidence that would suggest that Lucy is part of the humankind.
Right.
It's not the image of God. This is a creature made after its kind.
Okay.
It's an ape. All right. Well, what about ape diversity then? If Lucy is, I don't want to be flippant here, but if Lucy is just another ape, then what about ape diversity? And here's part of the story that you rarely get to hear. And that is when you look at apes in the fossil record, there are an insane variety of these creatures. There are so many different apes that are very different from one another. And there are so many different apes with so many different characteristics that there generally is not agreed on a particular evolutionary pattern of how apes evolved.
Okay.
Which is kind of mind-blowing, honestly.
Yeah. Particularly because when we think about modern apes, we think of chimps and gorillas and orangs. And, it's fairly limited diversity compared to the fossil record.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And we're presented with this skeleton and people say, look at the ape-like characteristics. It doesn't have a chin and it's got all these other ape things that are like apes. And yet, look, it walked upright. And so this is our missing link. This is the thing that shows humans evolved from apes, right? But it's not a missing link between humans and chimpanzees. And even the evolutionists understand that. This is not the missing link between humans and chimps. This is a missing link between humans and some earlier form of ape. But when you get to that earlier form of ape, it's chaos. Nobody knows how they all connect together.
Right.
And what I think is really fun about this is that there's a wide diversity of locomotion in these fossil
Interesting.
apes. So today we got the tree-dwelling orangutans. We've got the sort of quadrupedal, knuckle-walking gorillas and chimps. And then over here, we've got humans that walk on two legs. Okay. But in the fossil record, we have such bizarre sets of characteristics. For some groups, for some species, we don't even know how they got around. I mean, obviously they used their arms and legs, but to do what, we're not sure. Right. That's the level of diversity you have. So when you look at it like that, you realize among apes, locomotion, the way you get from A to B, is actually highly variable.
Right.
So the idea that you could have one that's sort of an upright walker, that seems far less alarming and disturbing.
Yeah.
When you realize that they do crazy stuff. They're all over the place. They're all over the map. And so that sort of variation isn't really that shocking. Now, how did Lucy's fossils end up where they are, where they were found?
Yeah.
Is she a victim of the flood?
Mm-hmm.
Did she come in later? How can we know this? Okay, so this is unfortunately, I'm going to be treading into your field. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. That's fine.
I'm going to do a little geology here. So I got to think about sort of the context of these fossils.
Yeah.
So the region where she's found in the Afar Triangle is called Hadar. And the geology there is pretty variable. You go several miles, you find one section that's exposed, like in a gully, and you can see the layers. You go a couple of miles away, and you're going to see some differences, some really important differences. And across the whole region there, where these fossils have been found, there's quite a lot of difference in the layering.
Okay.
Now, Paul, you've been to Grand Canyon.
Yep.
Got a lot of variability in layers there in the Grand Canyon?
Well, some of those layers you can trace across the continent.
Ah, okay.
They may be given different names
in
different places, but they're basically the same formation.
So you've got
a lot of continuity.
Correlation. Yeah. You can see those layers going for miles and hundreds of miles. Yeah. Thousands of miles even. But that's not the case in Hadar.
Right.
The layers, they don't go that far. It's very tricky to understand that geology.
Right.
That tells me right away, okay, well, continental geology, that's a continental source like a flood.
Yeah.
Like the global flood, the flood, not a flood.
Mm-hmm.
Local geology, where you have local variation that's pretty high, that tells me it's probably a local source, not necessarily the flood.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I say that with the acknowledgement that the layering here is quite thick. So the basal member of the layering in which Lucy was found, from the bottom of that to the top of the Kadanuumuu member, you're looking at 155 meters, or about 508 feet.
Oh, wow.
For you Americans that have been able to visit Washington, D.C., the Washington Monument is 555 feet tall. So that is a huge amount of thickness.
Yeah. It's a lot of sediment.
If this is a regional, local deposit, it's kind of unlike what's going on there today. And is it possible then that is even reasonable to think that you could do that without a global flood? Well, one other consideration here, those sediments are sitting on top of a tectonic spreading center, which is a flood-related feature. We've talked about tectonics before.
We have.
Related to the flood. And so when you see this tectonic spreading area there where these sediments have built up, okay, that was made in the flood. Those sediments must have been made after that was made in the flood. Okay, but is it possible then you could still have the Afar Triangle form, and then it fills up with stuff as the flood is receding? Well, when you look at the layering, you find these layers of tuff.
Okay.
How would you say that?
Yeah, tuff.
Tuff, just plain old tuff.
It's volcanic ash.
Tuff.
Yeah, TUFF.
It's
not TOUGH.
It's not tough. Yeah. It's tough. It's volcanic ash.
Yeah.
And those are from local sources, local volcanic sources. So while this sediment was being deposited, there were layers of tuff. There were volcanoes going off and depositing ash. And then more sediment was deposited, and then another layer of tuff, and more sediment, and another layer of tuff, and so forth. So again, we have this regional character to the sediments that we see there. It's not just that you have receding floodwaters dumping a bunch of stuff. You have volcanoes going off, leaving local volcanoes going off, leaving these layers of tuff.
Yeah.
But there's one final thing that I think really clinches it for me, and that is a location called 894. And there we have stone tools.
Right.
from the same set of sediments. And those stone tools are mostly basalt,
Okay.
or basalt if you're from America, or rhyolite. You say rhyolite?
Yeah, rhyolite.
Rhyolite.
Yeah.
So those are volcanic
Yeah.
stones.
Yeah.
And using the X-ray fluorescence, we can tell with the composition of those stone tools.
Yeah.
And we can pinpoint.
Match them to sources.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can see that they're all local.
Okay.
So while those sediments were being deposited, someone was picking up local volcanic rock and making
tools from it. Yeah.
So that's not happening during the flood.
No, that sounds like a post-flood.
That's got to be post-flood.
Yeah,
so
phenomenal.
my understanding of Lucy, she's a representative of ape diversity. She lived in the tumultuous time after the flood, when there was a lot more geological activity than we have today, testified by the thickness of the sediment.
It was still tectonically active,
still
volcanically
tectonically
active.
and volcanically active.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she's an important witness to a lot of really interesting time in the history of the world. But she is definitely a member of the ape group, and she represents part of the diversity that you don't hear about very much. And it's a much bigger diversity among the apes than we have today. So that would be my story of what the Lucy skeleton is all about.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because I don't think I've heard anybody quite put the story together in that form before. So that will be new, I'm sure, to many of our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, I've never written this down, mostly because she's just one skeleton.
Yeah.
And as a specialist and a scientist, I mean, it's nice. It's great to have this skeleton. It's great evidence for various features of, locomotion and what these creatures were like, what these apes were like. But she's made after her kind. She's not evidence of human evolution. And she's just not that big of a deal to me. And so I've never really taken the time to sort of spell out the whole story until now. You're hearing this breaking news right here. That's my story of Lucy. Yeah. There you go.
Not a big deal. So Lucy, not a big deal. Now, I
quote me on that.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people are going to disagree with you about that because people do make a big deal about Lucy. So
I know creationists make a big deal about it, but would other people? I think other people would probably say, yeah, but what about all these other things?
Yeah.
Right? They would go to the genome and they would say, look at the genomic similarity, and they would do all sorts of other things to try to argue against my conclusions about Lucy. They would also scoff at a global flood and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe Lucy's really important, but there have been so many discoveries since Lucy that supposedly evidence human evolution.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's one part of a bigger story.
It is.
And people often like silver bullets.
Yeah, they do.
They like to latch onto one thing and say, that's it. This is
the
human
clincher.
Evolution.
There you go.
And ignore actually the bigger story. So, Well, I think that's been really interesting. I hope our viewers and listeners have enjoyed that. I think the last two episodes talking about Lucy have been fascinating.
Yeah.
I've learnt a lot about Lucy. And it's kind of nice to lay out the story and actually to have her here.
Yeah.
So to have Lucy join us for these last two episodes. So that's really great. Todd, sign us off. I don't know what's coming next.
I don't know what's
we
coming
always
next
say
either.
that. We always say we have no idea what's coming
We do.
next.
Sometimes we know when we're doing an important cliffhanger two-parter like we just did, but I don't know. I don't really know what's on the schedule next.
No.
We'll find out as we go through production and decide how to order these episodes. But
we've got some really interesting things coming up.
Oh,
and we have lots of ideas. We're always fizzing with ideas.
We are.
And we record often some episodes ahead.
We do.
We don't always know what
order
they're coming
what
out
order
in.
they're-
So we kind of have to hedge our bets on that one.
That's right. Yeah. But thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. And I hope you've been, you Christians out there have been very affirmed in your faith. It's not that Lucy proves evolution.
No.
It's not that Lucy disproves evolution. It's that Lucy tells us about God's creation in ways that are kind of surprising sometimes, and maybe even unexpected for some folks. But still part of the wonderful diversity that God has made. And thank you all for your support. The Lucy skeleton here was made possible by donations from viewers like you and listeners like you. So please do visit letstalkcreation.org and consider financial support for the work that we do. And thank you very much. We will see you next time.
Yeah, see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Creation. For more information, visit us at letstalkcreation.org, where you'll find an archive of past episodes and all our show notes. If you'd like to leave a comment or make a suggestion, you can find us on all the major social media platforms. Let's Talk Creation is brought to you in the U.S. by Core Academy of Science and in the U.K. by Biblical Creation Trust. As a listener-supported ministry, we are grateful for all of your financial support. Find out how you can make a contribution at our website, letstalkcreation.org. Also remember to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends. Thanks, and see you next time.